Hello students, welcome to HSC Chemistry and the Industrial Chemistry video series. This is number 24 and the last one in the little discussion on detergents, looking at the environmental impact of detergents. We spent a couple of videos looking at detergents because there's a few different things that are important when we study detergents, mainly about their structure and their effectiveness and why they form why they're effective at forming emulsions of oil in water to help us clean our hair, our clothes, our bodies, and so on. So this last video is really just a little bit of a focus more on the environmental impacts of the use of detergents. So firstly, I guess the fact that detergents began with benzene derivatives gives you a little bit of an idea about some of the problems with the early detergents. Not great choices that were chosen back then. Benzene is a really good substance in terms of its carbon-hydrogen bonding, but it's an aromatic. It has a very strong aroma, and it is also been linked to some significant health issues. So benzene, again, is not something that we use very much at all these days, being phased out, certainly from common public use. The other problem, of course, with some of the early detergents is they had poor biodegradability. They didn't break down. We washed down into the waterways. They remained for long periods of time. Many of them produced a large amount of foam, and I mentioned that on the previous video, which can be a bit of a problem. And one of the, I guess, ways of trying to address that was with the addition of things called stabilizers. Which sort of helped to improve the effectiveness of the individual detergents. The problem was that it was phosphates that were often chosen as the salts that we used to help with this stabilization of the early detergents. We now know that phosphates are one of the significant contributors to water pollution, and specifically the problems of eutrophication, okay, and leading to things like algal blooms. So putting a lot of phosphates into the water is not great either, and that's actually one of the reasons why you sometimes see detergents marketed as phosphate-free. And this has been a specific move in order to try and reduce the amount of phosphates that are being released into the waterways and the potential damage that they can cause. The early detergents had these stabilizers, these phosphates in there, not only to address things like water hardness, but also had a change in the pH. One of the things that you will be aware of is that most cleansers are on the alkaline or basic end of the pH scale. So what we're trying to do is to move the pH along that scale, so up effectively. And some of these stabilizers, some of these phosphates were part of the components that were targeted to decrease water hardness and increase pH. As I suggested in the previous slide, that this had some fairly significant consequences in terms of both the increase in the phosphate levels leading to eutrophication and associated problems with things like algal blooms. Now, cationic detergents are great, and they don't tend to have quite the same foam production as some of the other detergents, particularly some of the earlier ones which were more anionic. But the problem with these ones is they have a biocidal action. They actually can attack and kill, or at least reduce, the population size of bacterial colonies. And this has an impact on sewage treatment. So if all of this is being washed down into the sink or through the showers, gets into the systems where the sewage is also going, and this can reduce the action of bacteria, and as a consequence of the presence of these particular detergents in the waterways, in the sewage treatment plants, they may not be as effective at treating the sewage as they would otherwise be. So this is a fairly significant environmental impact, which will have some consequences further down the line. Finally, I guess moving on to the modern detergents, what we've tried to do is to reduce the amount of phosphates, limit the amount of foaming, limit the amount of antiseptic type consequences that may affect the sewage treatments, but also the populations, the natural populations of microorganisms. And so now we're moving to these more biodegradable kinds of detergents. They're sourced from natural and organic materials in order to be more compatible with the natural waterways and also the organisms that live in them, and that can be more readily broken down into products such as carbon dioxide and water in the same kind of way that a large number of these sorts of compounds often are. So you will find earth-friendly, earth-choice kinds of products that are designed to try and address some of these problems that we've seen with some of the previous types of detergents and the way that they've been used historically. So keep an eye out next time you go through the supermarket, have a look at all of the different ways that these different detergents are marketed, and you'll actually see some of the historical aspects coming out in the way that each of these new ones are being marketed to be friendly to the environment, low in phosphates, low in antiseptic or biocidal components, lower in foam, effective in acting as surfactants or emulsifiers, and also good for the environment. That'll do with detergents. I think we'll move on from here. I'm sure you'll continue to produce these sorts of comparisons in your classroom, and thanks for watching.